So over the years, I've heard many criticisms of Coldplay and their music, and I always was really confused where exactly it was coming from. It wasn't until I got really invested in music itself that I looked into why the consensus about Coldplay was generally speaking negative. And if I'm being honest, some of the main criticisms hold weight and are hard to argue against, but my position on the band's reception is that those common criticisms don't take away from the band's quality and their staying power. The history behind Chris Martin's band, Coldplay, starts in London, England, where three band members, Chris Martin, Will Buckland, and Guy Berryman, met in college and started playing at local bars and clubs. Needless to say, they had humble beginnings. A year after their formation, drummer Will Champion would join as well. But this generally speaking by-the-books starting didn't stop them from making two hit EPs that would lead to success in later projects like the Blue Room EP and the famous debut album, Parachutes. This album was critically acclaimed for its singles like Shiver and Yellow and really put the band on the map in Europe and later in North America. Then later in 2002, A Rush of Blood to the Head was released, which shifted focus to much more piano-based melodies, which contrasted the acoustic guitar melodies with occasional piano features that was Parachutes. Then, after a live album released in 2003, X and Y took the American audience by storm in 2005, despite meeting mixed reviews from critics. This is really where Coldplay became the pop giant we know them as today, with X and Y hitting the very top of the Europe and North American charts. Even though they stayed grounded in their alternative roots, this album began their efforts of branching out into other genres, such as the era's current pop genre and some electric songs. And that effort continued in 2008 with Viva La Vida, an album which really saw Coldplay experimenting with other styles like blues and orchestral sounds. The tour they paired with this album would influence them to release the follow-up EP, Prospects March, which also, often grouped with Viva La Vida, saw commercial success. Milo Xyloto was then released in 2011, led by the single Every Teardrop is a Waterfall, and this album further leaned into the electronic style with a more pop sensibility, which was met with, again, mixed reviews. Despite this, the album once again performed extremely well in both America and Europe. A sort of interlude into their story is the album Ghost Stories, which features much more somber and simple melodies, especially for the time of 2014. This was also their shortest album. Then, with the shortest time in between release dates, is A Head Full of Dreams in 2015, which marks what most say is the debatable end of alternative Coldplay. This pop album is a mix of songs which have triumphant and upbeat melodies which play into the times and therefore saw monumental numbers. Then we reach the modern era of Coldplay, with the two albums being hopeful, inspiring records meant to reach out to the world in a positive way. Don't worry, we'll get to them. What I really want to avoid with this video is making it seem like I'm either A, just blindly defending Coldplay because I'm nostalgic of their early albums, or B, ranting about what other people say and claiming they are wrong using anecdotal evidence. That being said, I want to go through my history with the band so we're all on the same page here and everyone can see where my biases may or may not land. I, no word of a lie, grew up listening to Coldplay, and though I can't really remember exactly when I did, I can remember how, and that was when I started playing their songs on the piano. I really enjoyed how Chris Martin and the guys wrote their pieces out onto sheet music, and it made it really easy for a young Liam to play the songs on the piano growing up. And it wasn't until middle school that I started to hear the band being criticized, and at the time, I was really surprised. But honestly, over time, I started to see more and more where these common complaints were valid, and I took a more critical look at their music. Some tracks held up over the years, but overall, I've removed more and more from my favorites list as time has passed. I've gone through some phases where I've really hated the band, and some phases where I really loved the band, but now I kind of sit in the middle, looking at the band as something from my past that I used to listen to a lot, and now I listen to it occasionally just to, be nostalgic, and sometimes some of the songs are bangers. But now I think it's time we talk about the said criticisms that I've mentioned. Most common complaints can be categorized into two places. A, Coldplay is boring, and B, Coldplay sold out. And the tough part is that neither of these are necessarily untrue. In terms of Coldplay quote-unquote selling out, it's hard to argue against it because at the end of the day, any alternative band that starts catering to a wider pop audience is going to get that label. Does it detract from the quality of the music? In my opinion, it does and it doesn't. For the older albums, I don't look at them any worse knowing it, but it definitely makes the newer albums seem much more synthetic and soulless. But in terms of what makes them boring, this is where me and most people would disagree. To me, Coldplay shines in their early albums when they had a unique style. They leaned heavily on their one-of-a-kind piano hooks in A Rush of Blood to the Head and their sadder acoustic guitar harmonies in Parachutes. These early albums are not free from criticism though, them often compared with Radiohead's early albums and just being bland overall. But that is really just where music becomes becomes totally subjective, because even though those early albums have thought put into them, some people just won't like them. But to call the band bad or boring objectively based on an opinion of their early albums doesn't seem fair to me at all. I think most of you listening up until now are saying, hey man, that's a decent point. Maybe they were writing compelling and unique melodies early on. But here is where I debatably drink the Kool-Aid, because I don't have issues with Milo Xyloto, nor do I particularly hate Ghost Stories. I know that's a pretty hot take. I think both albums have compelling tracks, respectively, and I don't think it's fair to count out their success with their pop singles on these records either. Milo Xyloto is a feel-good album that is undeniably catchy in its best moments and only slightly nostalgic at its worst. Hurts Like Heaven, Charlie Brown, Every Teardrop is a Waterfall, and last but not least, Paradise had huge success and in my opinion are super catchy. I think music snobs like me can sometimes forget how compelling it is to just be swept away with a good old pop hook that isn't super condescending or pretentious. And I think Coldplay let the listener do that on this record. On their later projects, yeah, they tend to veer closer into the pretentious field of things, but here I think it's innocent enough to just be labeled as catchy. And with Ghost Stories, I think we saw a band that had a moment of self-awareness try to branch out to something that, while it wasn't perfect, was an interesting listen nonetheless. To me, the most standout moments of Ghost Stories are the interesting intros and outros and their ability to create a sad tone with their electronic sounds. These electronic sounds being exclusively used to be happy and upbeat in the previous albums. Take the track Midnight, which is a sad track that leans heavily on its repeating mysterious synth sounds and its omniscient vocals. To me, it's pretty compelling stuff. To conclude, I want to summarize my ideas into this. The two common criticisms of Coldplay, them being boring and them having sold out, do not detract from the band's quality, because their early albums have thoughtful and compelling melodies, and some of their later albums explore a blissful and innocent pop tone which isn't necessarily offensive. Like I said earlier, my goal with this video was to not seem super biased and annoying, and if you guys like to converse with me in the comments, I'd be more than happy. Just don't attack me too much. I'm just, giving my opinion here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.
Let's go.